You have returned, Drifter. Today I have for you an incredible story of sacrifice that will touch your heart. This young god gave up half his life to make sure his younger brother lives. It is simply lovely, so close your eyes and get comfortable. If you enjoy these timeless legends, don't forget to like the video and subscribe. It means a great deal to me knowing someone enjoyed watching my video. Castor and Polydeuces were the twin sons of the Spartan queen, who had been loved by a god in the form of a swan and by her mortal husband. Though they were born as princes, their fate was destined for something far greater than the crown of any earthly kingdom. One of them, Polydeuces, was born of divine blood, his father being the king of the gods, while Castor was mortal, sired by the queen's human husband. Yet from the beginning, the bond between them was unshakable, and no difference of origin could place a divide between their souls. They were known throughout the land not just for their noble birth, but for their bravery, their kindness, and the strength of their brotherhood. The world would come to know them not only as heroes, but as protectors of those in need, travelers caught in storms, guests in foreign lands, and riders galloping across the plains. The sea itself seemed to recognize their power, for when storms threatened the ships of men, strange lights, St. Elmo's fire, would flicker upon the rigging, and sailors would whisper prayers to the twins, knowing salvation had come. With their wide-brimmed hats and their horses underfoot, they moved like lightning, young and strong, destined for tales that would stretch into the stars. Their mortal journey was filled with glory. They rode with the Argonauts in search of the Golden Fleece, faced beasts in great hunts, and dared to march upon Athens to recover their stolen sister. But in time, fate came to test them in the harshest way. During a daring raid to steal cattle from two rivals, they were discovered. A clash followed, violent and fast, and in the fight Castor fell, struck down before his brother's eyes. In the fire of grief and rage, Polydeuces struck back, ending both of their enemies, but his soul was torn in agony. He had immortality promised to him, a gift from his divine father, but he could not bear to ascend without his brother. He refused the heavens unless Castor could rise with him. The god, moved by the strength of love between them, found a way, but the fates had to be obeyed, and so a balance was struck. They would live together still, but only one at a time in the light of Olympus. On alternating days, one brother would ascend to the shining sky, while the other descended into the silent darkness of the underworld. This cycle, endless and sorrowful yet full of love, kept them bound across the realms of life and death. Their tale did not end there. As a final tribute to their union, they were set in the night sky as two brilliant stars, the constellation known as Gemini. Half the year, their light would grace the heavens, visible to those who gazed up at night, while the other half, they would vanish, hidden below, just as their souls alternated between the realms. The people of the world never forgot them. The sea still flickers with strange lights in storms, and travelers still speak their names for protection. The brothers had transcended mortality not for ambition or conquest, but because of love, pure, unyielding love that not even death could break. They rode not just in the stories of old, but in the skies above, forever youthful, forever united, forever watching. Mortal was one, and death was his destiny, for no man born of mortal seed can escape the thread spun by the fates. And so it was for the brother who drew breath from a human father, marked by the mortal line that would one day end. But the other, the child of the god of war, was born not only of queenly blood but also of immortal spark, and so he was never meant to taste the decay of time or the grip of death. Yet their lives were bound in a way no thread could sever, and their fame, their bond, their sorrow, and their choice would echo across the lands and into the heavens. The strength of the one praised in songs, and the shining name of the other were carried from earth to Olympus and back again. For they did not dwell in only one place, but moved between two worlds, their presence felt both in the depths of the earth where their tombs stood among the people of their land, and in the bright heights of the sky where gods made their home. One day they remained within the house of the dead, in the folds of the earth at Therapne, where the soil kept their memory alive among the living, and on the next they rose up to the halls of Olympus, seated beside the Thunderer himself, as companions not only of their divine father, but of the fierce-eyed goddess of wisdom and the spear-bearing god of battle. They did not vanish from the world, for their memory was fed by the justice they loved, the games they presided over, and the protection they gave to those who walked the paths of danger. Among their people, they shared honors with the messenger of the gods and the great hero who once bore the heavens, for they were not just princes or warriors, but twin patrons of sacred contests, guardians of fairness, and witnesses of human striving. And all this came to pass not because of glory, but because of love. For when the mortal brother fell, struck down in rage by a rival whose cattle they had seized, he did not die alone. He was wounded by a bronze-tipped spear, and though his enemy too was brought down by the god's thunderous flame, burned with no kin to mourn him, it was the grief of the surviving brother that moved the skies. For he came running, swift as the wind, to where his fallen twin lay gasping, his life escaping, and in that moment he was no hero, no demigod, but only a brother, weeping over the loss of half his soul. With sorrow in his voice and tears burning his eyes, he called out to the sky, begging to follow into death rather than be left behind in empty glory. He pleaded for release, for a way to die, for he knew that fame was hollow when one's truest friend was taken, and no toil could be borne without the comfort of shared struggle. The god heard him, and in his divine form he stood before the weeping sun, offering a choice that no other mortal or immortal had been given. He revealed the truth, that one was born of a mortal king, the other of heaven's ruler, and because of this, only one had been destined for death. Yet the god did not deny love, and he granted a path. The immortal could dwell forever in Olympus, untouched by time, basking in the company of divine beings, or he could surrender half of that immortality and split his days, sharing life and death alike with the one he loved more than paradise. And there was no pause, no question, no weighing of gain and loss. The immortal brother chose without doubt, choosing not the throne of heaven, not eternal youth, but the bond that even death could not break. So it was arranged that each would take turns living and dying, their spirits cycling through the worlds, one rising as the other fell, one watching over the sky as the other slept beneath the stones, and thus neither was ever alone. Their voices were heard in both realms, their images drawn both in stars above and carved in stone below, and even the grave could not silence them. The god lifted the veil from the eyes of the fallen one, returning light and breath, not to defy death but to divide it, allowing each brother to carry its weight in turns. And in doing so, they became more than men, more than heroes, more even than demigods. They became symbols of love so strong it could balance the laws of heaven and earth. In time, their dwelling below was honored with reverence, called a god-built home, a place not of mourning but of eternal presence, while their light above was called Gemini, guiding sailors and shining down on festivals of justice. Each day the wheel would turn, each day one would rise and one would sleep, yet in all days their union endured, undiminished, undivided and unforgotten. The earth always remembered them, one skilled with the reins of swift horses, the other shining with divine glory. Castor, master of steeds, and Polydeuces, noble and bright. Together they lived lives of courage and brotherhood, unmatched in devotion and strength. They rode and fought as one, and no challenge seemed too great, no enemy beyond their reach. But destiny brought them to a bitter crossroad when they prepared to ambush their rivals, Idas and Lyncus. The plan was set, but Lynceus saw Castor first and warned his brother, who quickly attacked and struck Castor down. The fall of Castor was not just the fall of a man, but the breaking of a bond that tied two souls. Rage and sorrow ignited in Polydeuces, who pursued the killers. He hurled his spear and struck Lynceus down, avenging his brother in part. Then, driven by grief and fury, he chased Idas, but a heavy rock thrown in defense caught him, dazing him, stopping his charge. In that moment, the skies opened, and the god who watched over them sent forth a thunderbolt. Lightning descended and struck Idas, consuming him in divine fire. Then, the god lifted Polydeuces to the heavens, intending to grant him immortality. But Polydeuces could not accept paradise while his brother's body lay cold and lifeless, still bound to the earth. He refused to live as a god without the one he loved most. He chose instead to share all fates equally, asking not for glory alone, but to remain joined with Castor even in death. The god, moved by the request, granted the twins an unusual gift. They would alternate days between Olympus and the mortal world, living one day among the gods and one day beneath the earth. This way, neither would be left alone for long, and even death could not separate them fully. One day in the brightness of the heavens, the next in the silent tomb. They passed eternity as two halves of a whole. The poets would speak of this bond, saying one pair would be welcomed by Hades, the other by the green meadows of Olympus, twin brothers bound by love so deep that not even death could untie its knot. The world honored them not just as warriors, but as divine, because they had once walked among men, yet now stood beside the gods. Others before them had risen from mortal ranks to receive divine honors, heroes and protectors, but few had done so through loyalty, sorrow, and sacrifice as they had. Their names were counted among those remembered forever, not only for their feats, but for the way they lived and died. They had once sailed with great heroes aboard a legendary ship, joined in quests across the sea. The god of the sea had guided their ship, and during that voyage, he revealed their future, that they would be known as sons of the Sky Father and honored across the world like the gods themselves. From that time on, they were called by a name that told of their divine parentage, and men everywhere gave them praise and built shrines and altars, not for fear, but for reverence. Stories passed from mouth to mouth spoke of their unmatched bravery, how they had stood out among all the heroes in battles and in storms, and how they appeared to help those in danger when hope seemed lost. Sailors especially looked to them in times of sudden peril, for it was said they came swiftly to the rescue of anyone caught in misfortune, their presence shining in flickers of light upon ship masts, signs of salvation in the dark waves. Their courage, skill, and fairness earned them more than mortal praise. It earned them immortality in memory and reverence, for men believed them to be sons of the Thunderer, and when at last they left the world of men, they did not vanish into silence. They were given the gift of unending honor, their spirits becoming symbols of rescue and strength. Their dual existence, alive and dead, rising and falling with the passing days, became a powerful symbol. Even centuries later, others would compare their own changing fortunes to that cycle, calling it the life of these twins, a life of high praise and bitter rejection, a cycle of celebration and mourning, of being lifted like gods and then cast down like mortals. Their tale became more than myth. It became a mirror for others. Their love and sacrifice showed what it meant to choose togetherness over greatness, to remain bound when all power could have separated them. They chose to be twin flames that flickered across two worlds, sharing the weight of time, trading places between earth and sky, and carrying each other through both light and shadow. Castor struck down Lynceus in the heat of battle, his hand guided by skill and vengeance. But when Lynceus fell, the rage and sorrow in Ida surged like a wave, pushing aside all thought of feud or the woman they once fought for. Idas, forgetting his thirst for revenge, turned to mourning and began to gather his brother's bones, intent on honoring him with a proper burial. With his hands heavy from grief, he started to build a funeral monument, raising stone upon stone as a mark of love. But Castor, who still stood victorious, intervened, his pride stirred not by hatred, but by the sting of insult, for he believed that the triumph had made him seem weak, as if he were no better than a woman bested in strife. In that moment, the bitter flame of rivalry reignited. Some said Idas, filled with rage, drew his sword and pierced Castor in the thigh, the steel sinking deep into muscle and cutting short the breath of triumph. Others claimed it was not a blade but the monument itself, an act of anger masked as mourning, that crushed Castor beneath its weight, a grave that became a murder weapon. When the news reached Polydeuces, he rushed to the place, fury and sorrow racing through his veins, and found his brother lifeless, his form still and cold upon the ground. He faced Idas in single combat, and the fight did not last long, for love and grief gave strength to his arm, and in that moment he overcame his brother's killer, reclaiming Castor's body from the dust. With trembling hands he buried him, laying him down with care and reverence, as one might place a piece of one's own soul into the earth. But though he had triumphed, though he had avenged and mourned and buried, peace would not come. He had been given a star, a sign of divine favor from the god who ruled the sky, and he was told that the honor of immortality was his alone, for the god declared that Castor and another, the daughter of their mortal father, were of human blood, while Polydeuces and his sister Helen were of divine origin, born of the Thunderer. The news struck him like a second blow. He could not rise to the heavens with such joy when his twin lay in darkness, could not accept eternity while his brother tasted only death. He turned to the god and begged, his voice filled with sorrow and resolve, asking to share whatever had been given to him, not for glory, but for love. The god, seeing the depth of his heart, granted the request, and the two were given a fate unlike any other. With the permission of the fates, who seldom waver, they were allowed to return from the underworld, not fully alive and not fully gone, but sharing life and death in equal turns. One day they would walk among the gods, basking in light and praise, and the next they would dwell in shadow and silence among the resting souls beneath the earth. This gift, both blessing and burden, became a legend told across lands. Their bond, stronger than time or death, made them more than men. Mortals no longer, they became stars, their light seen by all who looked up into the night. They were placed in the sky as the twins, side by side, forever together. Astronomers called them Castor and Polydeuces, and they were honored not for rivalry or conquest, but for unity, for choosing each other above all else. No thirst for power ever broke their brotherhood. No ambition drove them apart. They did not fight for leadership or outshine each other in silent envy. Every choice was shared, every path walked together, and for this they were rewarded, raised to the heavens, their figures burned into the night as a symbol of love's triumph over death. Even the god of the sea honored them, giving them horses that raced like wind and the power to help those lost in shipwrecks and storms. Many spoke of Castor's fall, some saying he died in Aphidne, slain in the fight between Sparta and Athens, others saying he perished defending his home when their enemies brought war to Sparta's gates. Yet in all versions the end was the same. The living twin chose not to live without the fallen, and by that choice, he brought both to a new fate. Some poets told of how they once stole brides promised to others, how love lit the fire of conflict that led to the deadly duel, how they could have fled but stood their ground instead, unwilling to win by running away. And in that barren place, that treeless land where they made their stand, they carved their legend with blood and pain. That place, Aphidne, bore the memory of where mortal paths became something greater. Though one died and one lived, though one rose and the other fell, they both found the same ending, not in separation, but in shared destiny. And so, their stars continue to shine, each rising when the other sleeps, and every night they remind the world that love can bend the will of gods, that brotherhood can defeat even the final silence of death. Castor was struck in the chest by the sharp blade of Lynceus, the sword piercing deep, catching him off guard and dropping him to the ground in pain and disbelief, the sudden wound draining his strength as the earth caught his fall. But his fall did not go unseen, for his brother was near, and swift as a storm, Polydeuces came to avenge him. He raised his spear and drove it into Lynceus at the place where the neck met the shoulders, delivering a blow so forceful that it ended the battle in a single thrust. But the fury did not end there, for Idas, filled with rage and sorrow at the loss of his brother, rose in retaliation, and chaos threatened to consume them all. Before more blood could spill, a fire came from the sky, a flash of power hurled by the hand of the god himself. The thunderbolt struck near Idas, and though it drove him back and ended his threat, some still claimed the lightning did not disarm him, choosing to see pride even in the fall. In the midst of the aftermath, with the field now still and the pain of loss hanging heavy, the heavens opened above Polydeuces. The sky welcomed him, for the divine gift was his alone, a reward for his bloodline. But as the light reached down to lift him, he turned his face upward and spoke words that would echo forever, asking his father not to give him the whole of heaven, but to let him share it, to divide the immortality that had been promised. He said that even half of the gift would be greater than the whole if it meant his brother could rise with him, and so the choice was granted. From that moment forward, the two no longer lived in the same way as others. One would shine above while the other rested below, and then they would trade places, one breathing in Olympus while the other slumbered beneath the earth. This exchange became a rhythm of brotherhood, a cycle of love that no death could break, and both of them became lights in the sky, stars that watched over sailors and gave hope to those caught in storms. Their presence on troubled seas became a promise, and many told how the twins assisted ships in danger, how their light flickered above masts in dark nights, bringing courage and calm to fearful hearts. Others spoke of their past, of how they once stole away two sisters who had been promised to others, an act of passion that brought war and death, but also sealed the legend of their devotion. Some even claimed they had been like those before them, like the one who carried Helen away, like the son of Aegeus who had also taken what was not his, for desire knows no caution. But while their hearts burned with fierce love, it was not conquest or pride that defined them, but what followed: sacrifice, grief, and the desire to be together above all else. Their story became one of honor, and as years passed, they were remembered not merely as men, but as examples of how mortals could become something more. Wise men and poets said that when people showed great service, when they brought good to others, the world honored them not with gold but with remembrance, with a place among the stars. That is how they spoke of the twins, placing them alongside other noble souls who had been granted immortality, not because they were born gods, but because they lived as heroes. Their fame spread across lands, and cities built temples and shrines in their names, treating them as gods, even though they had once walked as men. Their bond was praised above all else, for they never quarreled for power, never acted without the other's voice, never sought victory alone. They consulted one another always, moved as one, and because of this unity, they were set in the sky, side by side. Even in the world of constellations, their place was certain, for the twins who had once ridden into battle on snow-white horses, their spears shining, were now eternal lights. Before they became stars, they had joined in the famous hunt for the monstrous boar, fighting bravely among the greatest of their age. Their legend grew not just from what they did, but how they did it, together, with hearts bound as tightly as fate itself. In the sky, they became Gemini, the constellation of the twins, and astronomers named the two lights after them. It was said that on alternating days, one light would glow more brightly than the other, for it marked the day one brother was alive among the gods, and the other slept in the shadows. And then they would switch. This pattern, this heavenly breath between light and dark, life and rest, became their eternal gift and their lasting reminder. Even poets could not speak of love or sacrifice without invoking their names, for they had become the truest symbol of devotion that transcends the boundary between life and death. Their stars shone down not only on the sea, but on every heart that knew the pain of parting and the hope of reunion. Though they had once walked the earth, though they had once bled and grieved, they were now lights in the sky, forever circling, forever watching, forever together. The question was asked, what is the cause of this pair of stars that shine so bright in the sky? The answer came from the lips of the god himself, spoken with divine clarity, revealing the story behind the constellation known as Gemini. It began with the twin brothers, the horseman and the boxer, strong sons of the same mother, born to rule the earth with valor and beauty. In a time before stars bore their names, they took for themselves two sisters, daughters of another house, seizing them in an act that would spark a violent conflict. The brothers of the women, sworn to reclaim what was taken, rose against the twins. A war followed, and in the clash, Castor was struck down, and his life poured out upon the earth. The sky, however, had already opened for the surviving brother, for he was born of the divine, destined to take his place among the stars, but he could not rise without the other. Looking up to his father, he spoke not to claim his reward, but to offer it. He asked that the gift of eternity be divided in two, that he might share his heavenly fate with the one who had fallen. He said that even half of the gift would be greater than the whole if his brother could walk beside him. Moved by this plea, the Father of Gods granted his request. And so it was that the two were bound in a cycle, exchanging places between sky and earth, living in light one day and resting in shadow the next. Because of this, both stars came to assist sailors in their hour of need, guiding those lost in storms and calming the seas when the winds turned cruel. Their presence, appearing as twin flames of light in the rigging of ships, was seen as a sign of safety, a promise of survival. The people called this St. Elmo's fire, a glow that danced upon the mast when hope was fading. Ancient voices, speaking through hymns and poems, told how these twin sons of the great god flew through the air on golden wings when summoned by shipmen in distress. When storms struck the ocean and mighty waves tossed the boats like toys, the desperate turned to the twins, making vows and prayers with offerings of white lambs at the prow. They pleaded for salvation from the winds and waves, and suddenly 2 shining figures would appear in the sky, darting through the gloom, descending to the ships with glowing forms. As they came, the winds softened, the sea calmed, and relief washed over the terrified sailors. Their appearance was a sign that the storm would pass, a moment of peace delivered in the darkest hours. All who saw them were filled with joy and rest from their suffering. Another voice from an earlier age, calling from a distant island, invited the sons of Zeus and Leda to come with kindness in their hearts, to leap from their fast horses and bring salvation to those in peril. Across the earth and over the sea, they moved with ease, rescuing those who faced a cold end, springing onto the decks of ships like light itself, glowing from afar, a beacon in the blackness of night. Their fire ran up the forestays of the ship, casting brightness on the dark sails, showing sailors they were not alone. They had once been men, but now they were more than that. They were saviors, seen from far off, beautiful and strong, sent to help in times of fear. In another voice, older still, they were called saviors without equal, and even the great thinkers of later ages would cry out their names in times of trial, calling for rescue when the great wave approached, hoping for the twin protectors to deliver them from doom. They were not only stars in the sky, but symbols of protection, proof that even those who fall may rise again, and that loyalty between brothers could change the order of the heavens. Their bond had overcome death, and because of it, they were given a power few others received, the power to bring calm to the chaos of the sea, to bring peace to the frightened, and to shine forever as a sign of help. And so their constellation remains, the twin lights of Gemini born from tragedy, shaped by sacrifice, and remembered through every voyage and storm. They were once the horseman and the boxer, but now they are more. They are the light that saves, the fire that leads, and the stars that stand side by side above the world. During the voyage of the Argonauts, when the sea raged and dark clouds gathered above the heads of the brave men, sailing toward their uncertain fate, a storm unlike any they had faced before swept across the waters. The waves rose high, crashing down upon the ship with such force that even the strongest among them lost hope. The wind howled like a wild beast, snapping ropes, tipping the vessel, and turning the sky into a churning wall of shadow and thunder. The chieftains, seasoned warriors and leaders all, felt helpless against the fury of the sea. Just when all seemed lost and the ship on the verge of breaking, one voice rose above the roar, not in command or fear, but in song and prayer. It was the voice of the one among them who had been initiated into the ancient mysteries of the gods of Samothrace, and it was he who knew what powers to call upon in such desperate hours. He turned to the deities known to him, the hidden ones, the guardians in shadow, the protectors behind the veil, and offered prayers for salvation. As his voice carried across the winds, something shifted. The storm did not grow stronger, but began to still. The waves, once violent, began to ease. And in that moment of sudden calm, when silence returned like a breath held too long, 2 brilliant stars appeared above the heads of the twin brothers on the ship. The light was clear, undeniable, shining as a sign, and every man on board turned to witness it. They knew at once it was no accident, no trick of weather or light. This was a divine act, a blessing from the gods. From that day on, the story was passed down, retold through generations of sailors and storytellers, how the storm had broken not through strength or skill, but through the sudden appearance of the twins, whose shining presence had stilled the sea. From then forward, when sailors found themselves caught in storms, they prayed not just to the sea gods, but to the deities of Samothrace. And when they saw strange fire dancing above their ships in the night, they did not fear, but took heart, for they believed those twin stars were the Dioskouroi, come to rescue the doomed from the teeth of the sea. And so the brothers became known as those who appear in unexpected danger, helpers to those who have nowhere else to turn, guardians not only of cities and lands, but of ships and the lives within them. Again and again, they were said to come when all hope seemed lost, arriving not with armies, but with sudden light, with calm, with a sense that someone greater had taken the helm. Their fame grew not only from the battles they fought, or the stories of their birth, but from their constant readiness to help. It was their character, their bravery, fairness, and justice that earned them love and memory across all lands. They were not known for ruling, but for saving, not for conquering, but for standing beside those in danger. Even historians, long after their time, recorded how people called upon them in storms, believing they would arrive like fire on the masts. The Athenians gave them a name that meant those above, linking them to the stars, for they believed the light that twinkled in the night was their sign, their presence above. In another tale, it was said that during a great sea battle, twin stars flared up on either side of a leader's ship, just as it left the harbor. The light shimmered by the rudders as though guiding the ship, and those who saw it whispered that the twins had come again, protecting the journey and pointing the way to victory. In time, their name became a symbol, used to describe what it meant to be a protector, a guardian to the weak, a savior to those who had nothing left. They were the ones who stood by the desperate, who brought help when no help remained. Artists and poets described them as youthful and strong, always without beards, their faces lit with clarity and purpose. It was written that during storms, stars were seen descending upon their heads, as though the heavens themselves wished to mark them, to show the world that these were not ordinary men, but chosen ones, favored by the gods. The Father of the gods placed them in the sky as a reward, not only for their love for each other, but for their unwavering commitment to others. Another god, ruler of the sea, gave them horses swift as the wind and the power to aid those in shipwrecks. And so they became stars, known by name, known by light. Their constellation was called Gemini, the twins, and for every sailor who looked up into the night while waves crashed below, those stars were more than light. They were hope. In them was the memory of the moment the storm gave way to calm, the story of 2 brothers who never abandoned each other and who, even in death, returned again and again to stand with those in peril. The heavens did not forget their kindness, and the earth did not forget their courage. Whether in battle or in storm, their presence was always the same, timely, saving, silent, and bright. And so their legend sailed across time, glowing quietly above the dark waters, always watching, always ready. How I feared that the sea might steal away your name, feared that the waves might claim your memory, and that future sailors journeying across those same waters would mourn your loss with heavy hearts and tearful songs. In my fear, I made countless vows to the gods of the deep, calling out to the ruler of the sea, to the twin sons of the great sky god, and even to the goddess who once walked as mortal, hoping that such divine beings might bring you safely home. Among these gods, the brothers stood as lights of hope, born of Leda, riding with the Argonauts, their hair said to glow with starfire, marking them as more than mortal. In times of danger, poets called upon them, the twin stars of the sky, urging them to take their place at the mast's twin horns, to let their glow light the darkness above sea and sky alike, to push away the angry star of their sister, whose appearance was said to stir tempests and sink ships. Their light was not of fury but of comfort, a guide to sailors in trouble, called down by prayer and hope, flashing above the yardarms like fire from the gods. Again and again, their stars were said to shine over the trembling ships, bringing peace to those caught in storms, steadying the trembling hands of those who feared the sea would be their grave. It was said that one of the two, whose name echoed softly in the wind, had the power to quiet the sea itself, to hush the crashing waves and cradle the ships in silence. And though they dwelled beneath the earth in a home shaped by divine hands, they were always alive, ever watchful. One was the master of swift horses, a tamer of hooves that beat like thunder across the land, and the other, strong and radiant, bore himself with the grace of stars. They were not just gods of rescue, but guides to the lost, guardians to those with no home, patrons of those without shelter, riding over land and sea, their names whispered by strangers and welcomed by the desperate. In the days of sacred contests, their presence was honored as well, for to them was given the right to watch over the games of old, contests of strength and skill, where mortals pushed themselves for glory. They shared this role with others of high repute, joining with the swift messenger and the son of the great hero, presiding not just with pride, but with fairness, with love for those who showed justice and honor. True were these gods to those who lived rightly, standing beside those who walked in virtue, never failing those who cried out for mercy. The songs of the poets remembered their tale, calling the muses to sing of their birth, of the great peak beneath which their mother bore them after the sky god had cloaked himself in shadow and joined with her. From that union came the brothers, shining in youth, riding swift horses, champions of man, sons of divine will and mortal grace. Born near the towering hill, they stood as saviors on earth, deliverers of those in danger, and their names, spoken with reverence, carried across centuries. Another hymn spoke of them as the sons of the high god, children of Leda with beautiful ankles, one known for his mastery of horses, the other for his perfect virtue. Together, they moved through the world not just as warriors, but as shining protectors, bringing peace to sea and land, never fading, always near. And though time passed, and empires rose and fell, and ships gave way to silence, their stars remained. The sky never forgot them. The sea never stopped calling them. Mortals, in fear and in awe, never ceased to pray to them. Even as storms grew and faded, even as temples crumbled and songs softened, their presence endured, in the glow above the mast, in the hush of the waves, in the whisper of hoofbeats across the distant plains, and in the quiet comfort of those who believe in help when all else fails. The brothers, born of a clouded sky, shone with clarity, always together, always watching, always riding. Of swift-going ships, when stormy gales rage over the ruthless sea, when the wind howls without mercy and the waves rise like dark mountains, shipmen fear the deep and call upon the sons of great Zeus with vows of white lambs, their offerings made at the forepart of the prow, where the vessel cuts through the water. They call not in pride but in desperation, for the sea begins to close over them, the wind driving the ship lower and lower, until it seems as though the ocean itself will swallow them whole. Their arms grow weary, their voices hoarse from shouting into the void, their prayers rising alongside the cries of seagulls and the creaking of wood pressed by the weight of water. Yet suddenly, just when the waves seem about to tear the ship apart, two forms flash across the sky, darting through the air on tawny wings, their arrival like lightning but without thunder, like fire but without destruction. The twin figures appear high above, and as they descend the sea hears them. The wind, cruel and wild only moments before, begins to ease, its roar falling to a whisper. The crashing of the waves stills, the surface of the white sea smooths, and peace comes over the water. Fair signs are they, these two brothers, deliverance from toil, the final answer to desperate cries. And when the shipmen see them, when they witness the twin lights that pierce the storm and bring calm, their hearts lift, and they are glad. Rest returns to their bodies, weariness falls away, and they know they have been saved not by chance, but by grace. The brothers, hailed as riders upon swift horses, known by sea and land, carry with them a reputation that spans ages, always the first name spoken in trouble, always the last to be forgotten when calm is restored. And at sacred shrines where healing was sought, they stood beside others of great skill and power, summoned by the sick, welcomed by those who believed, their names uttered alongside the most honored of gods. Even in the performances of ancient plays, where gods were made visible by mortals in costume, their image appeared. When the goddess of marriage made her entrance, she was not alone. The twins attended her, dressed in helmets shaped like the eggs from which they were said to have emerged, each helmet crowned with a star to show their heavenly place. On the stage, boys played the part of the brothers, their presence a sign of glory and guardianship. Far from Greece, in lands touched by other winds, the same names were known. Among the Celts who lived beside the ocean, stories had taken root that the twin gods had come from the sea long ago, appearing not as conquerors, but as guests, and from that moment were honored above all others. Their arrival, preserved in tradition, became part of the lore of distant people who saw the same stars, felt the same storms, and hoped for the same saving light. Their fame traveled across borders, crossing languages and cultures, until their identity intertwined with the very idea of divine help in desperate hours. At sea, on land, in story, and in worship, the brothers became more than just figures from a tale. They became the shining response to a world filled with danger. Their rescue was not limited to ships alone, for the gods who brought calm to the sea also rode across the earth on swift steeds, masters of horsemanship, known for their grace and control, tamers of the wild, and honored in every land where horses ran. They watched over strangers and protected guests, ensuring that those without shelter would not be without safety. Their presence brought comfort to travelers and those far from home, and their strength stood like a wall between danger and the weak. In the sacred games where men raced and wrestled for glory, their names were remembered. The one who brought order to Olympus chose them to preside over the contests, to stand beside the herald of the gods and the son of the hero who bore the sky. There too they favored justice, blessing those who competed with honor and watching those who played fair. They were not only riders of horses and saviors of ships, but judges of virtue, guardians of fairness, and examples of unity. Poets called on the muses to sing their praises, asking the daughters of memory to tell the story of their birth. Beneath the heights of a sacred mountain, their mother bore them after she was visited by the cloud-wrapped son of the sky god. From that hidden union came the twins, each shining with their own strength, one known for his hands on the reins of the horse, the other for his calm and blameless spirit. Born near the tall peak, they would later rise beyond the mountain, their story stretching not only across the lands of men, but upward into the night sky. Their tale became hymn and memory, passed down through generations as a song of salvation. They were born to ride, to rescue, to judge, and to shine. And though storms still rise and winds still rage, and though ships still tremble under the weight of angry seas, when sailors see twin lights above the mast, when fire dances silently through the night, they remember the names of the brothers. They remember the wings of calm, the stilling of waves, and the deliverance from despair. They remember the riders upon swift horses, the sons of the high god, and the peace that follows their flight. Between the lands of Sigaeum and the long arm of the Chersonnesus, the girl known as Helle fell from the sky into the sea, and that stretch of water would carry her name forever after. Hellespont, the Sea of Hell. Her story lived beyond her fall, for her tomb was shown near the place called Pactia, where it stood as a reminder of her flight and her end. Her name was etched not just in stone, but in the waves that swallowed her, and the tale was repeated by poets, historians, and travellers alike. She had once been the daughter of a king, born to Athamas, lord of Boeotia, and Nephele, a cloud sent from the gods. Her mother, not of earth but sky, bore 2 children, Phrixus and Helle, and they lived in peace until the day their father took a new wife. The woman was Ino, and she looked with jealousy upon the children of the cloud, seeing them as threats to her own sons. Ino set her mind to harm them, and by cunning she wove her plan. She told the women of the land to parch the wheat before it was sown, and so the harvest failed, the earth offering no grain, and the people, struck by famine, turned to oracles for answers. But Ino was not finished. She bribed the messengers sent to consult the gods, and they returned with false words, saying that the famine would only end if Phrixus was sacrificed to the heavens. The people, desperate and fearful, believed, and they pressed the king until he placed his son upon the altar. But before the blade could fall, Nephele came down, swift and unseen, and lifted her children away. To save them, she gave them a gift from Hermes, a ram with a fleece of shining gold, strong and divine, born to carry them through the sky. Phrixus and Helle mounted the ram, and it leapt into the air, its hooves finding no earth but gliding through clouds, over cities, fields, and rivers, soaring above the troubled land. Beneath them, the earth passed quickly, and the sea approached like a great mirror, wide and deep. As they crossed the sea between Sicyum and the Chersonnesus, the wind strong and the sky vast, Helle, perhaps frightened, perhaps weary, lost her grip. Her hands slipped, and she tumbled from the golden back of the beast into the rushing waves below. The ram could not stop, and Phrixus could not reach her. The sea took her, and though some said she drowned, others whispered that the god of the deep saved her and transformed her into something more. But the waves would always remember her, and the waters were given her name, Hellespont, so that none would forget where she fell. Her tomb was placed near the shore, and travellers would speak of it, passing by with quiet words and lowered eyes. Phrixus continued alone, carried across the sea to the lands far from home, while Helle's name became a part of the world. Even in later days, when ships gathered, and people stood to watch the great Argo take its first journey. The women on shore spoke of Helle. Some wished that the sea that had claimed her had taken her brother and the golden ram as well, and on the heights of Mount Lephistios, others still remembered how the children had been saved by divine will, a shining ram appearing in the moment of doom. Historians wrote that their escape had been more than flight. It was the will of the gods, a guiding hand steering them through the sky. The gods had not forgotten them, and the tale became one of rescue and loss, of sibling bonds and sudden fate. The sea still carried the memory of her fall, its name a sorrow and a song, a place where sky met water, and a girl once fell from golden safety into the dark unknown, never to rise again. And so the Hellespont stood, its waves washing the same shores, its name carried on winds, its depths holding the story of the girl who crossed the sky but could not reach the other side. A ram whose fleece was made of gold, gleaming and bright, bore 2 children across the sky, flying over land and sea, carrying them far from danger and toward safety. But as they crossed the sea between the shores of 2 distant lands, the girl slipped and fell, her body vanishing into the deep waters below. The sea, which had once been unnamed, now held her memory in its very waves, and so it came to be known as the Hellespont, the Sea of Helle. Her name became part of the world, etched not in stone, but in the moving water that had swallowed her fall. Some would say this was a tale of the skies, of gods and clouds, of children escaping wrath by divine means. Others would retell the story more simply, saying that Phrixus had sailed upon a ship, bearing the carved head of a ram on its bow, and Helle, tormented by the sickness that comes with the churning sea, had leaned over the side of the ship and, losing her strength and balance, had fallen into the cold depths. But whether by ram through the heavens or boat through the sea, the end for Helle remained the same. The water had taken her. In the land of Colchis, far from where the fall had happened, a fleece of gold was still kept, preserved as something sacred, for it was believed to be the very fleece of the ram that had carried the siblings through the sky. Those who visited that place would gaze upon it with reverence, for the story of that journey lived not only in poems, but in relics left behind. Long after, when ships sailed from the Rhoetian shore to far harbours, when they crossed to the island of Tenedos, their oars ploughed the grey waters of Helle, the sea still bearing her name, a quiet marker of her journey and her loss. The story, like the tide, rolled back further still. A man named Athamas, born of Aeolus, had taken a wife not of earth but of cloud. From her he had 2 children, Phrixus and Helle. But then came a second wife, one who looked on the cloud's children with cruel eyes. Her name was Ino, and she, desiring her own children to rise above the others, formed a secret plan. She gathered the women of the tribe and whispered to them, instructing them to parch the seed grain, drying it before planting so that it would not grow. The fields, once full of green, gave nothing. The land suffered, and famine crept in, bringing sickness and death. When the people cried out in fear, Athamas sent a servant to the oracle at Delphi for guidance. But Ino had twisted the truth again, bribing the servant to bring back false words. The plague would end only if Phrixus were sacrificed. The king hesitated, torn between duty and love. Yet before he could act, Phrixus stepped forward. He said he would go willingly, that he alone would save the people. Dressed in sacrificial ribbons, he walked to the altar. But mercy came not from man, but from fate, for the servant could not bear the lie. He told the truth to Athamas, and all was revealed. Another version tells of madness sent by a god, that struck the children and drove them into the woods. There, as they wandered lost among the trees, their mother appeared, cloud-born, shining, gentle. She brought with her a ram with golden fleece, a creature born of the sea god, and a maiden once transformed to hide from those who hunted her. This ram was their salvation. She told them to climb upon its back and ride to the distant land of Colchis, where they were to give the ram to a king and offer it to the god of war. And so they climbed, and the ram took to the skies, soaring high above the sea. But as they crossed the water, Hela lost her hold. She fell from the ram's back and vanished beneath the waves. The sea, dark and vast, kept her, and its name bore hers from that day onward. Her brother made it safely to Colchis, where he fulfilled the task given to him. Yet the loss of Hela remained, part of every version of the tale. Some said the ram had become a star, placed in the sky as the constellation Aries, the same ram that had carried them across the Hellespont. Others spoke of false rumors spread by those who sought to destroy Phrixus, saying he had wronged another, and in the grief that followed, steps were taken to end his life. But the sky-born mother, ever watchful, intervened. Her care did not end with the gift of the ram. She acted to preserve her children in every way she could, yet despite her efforts, the sea still claimed one. And so the tale passed from mouth to mouth, across generations, across cities and islands. It became a song, a warning, a legend. The water that once shimmered with sunlight now whispered her name. Ships crossing the strait spoke of her, poets wrote of her, and monuments near Pactia remembered her. The golden ram's flight had become more than escape. It had become a tale of love, betrayal, rescue, and loss. The sea, the sky, and the stars carried the weight of that memory, holding Hela in their silence forever. Intervened, and rescuing Phrixus and Hela his sister, put them on the ram, and bade them flee as far as they could through the Hellespont. The moment their mother swept down from the sky and wrapped them into her clouded arms, the cries at the altar were silenced, the fear of the people drowned by the rush of divine air, and the children were lifted away from the stone that was meant to mark the end of their young lives. The golden ram, a creature not of earth but of heaven's will, gleamed with the light of the sun itself, and with its fleece shining like fire, it accepted the weight of the siblings on its back. The air parted before them, the land dropped below, and the sea, vast and endless, stretched out like a mirror beneath them. But even the gifts of gods cannot stop what is bound by fate. As the ram flew over the waters, Hela gripped one of its horns with a hand growing weak. The wind stung her eyes and chilled her fingers, and her body, though lifted high, felt the pull of the world below it. As they passed between the regions of Sigeum and the long arm of the Chersonese, her strength failed. Her fingers slipped from the golden curve and she fell. Her voice, once filled with fear, vanished into the rush of wind, and her body disappeared into the waves below. The sea took her gently, but the name she left behind would not sink. The waters that had no name before her fall became the Hellespont, the sea of Hela, holding her memory forever in their tides. Phrixus, still clinging to the ram, looked down and reached for her with both hands, weeping as he watched her vanish. His voice called after her, but there was no answer, and the sound of the wind gave no comfort. His heart, split by grief, carried the weight of her loss through every mile of sky that remained. The ram flew on as it had been commanded, and brought him to Colchis, a land far from his own, where fate would finish what it had begun. There, Phrixus descended from the golden back of the ram and led it to a temple. As thanks and remembrance, he sacrificed it and hung the gleaming fleece inside, letting its light burn for all who would pass through that sacred place. But Hela, though gone, was not forgotten. Poets and mourners turned their eyes to the sea she had named. The story spread from city to city, whispered in markets and temples, written in verse and carved in stone. The seeds of the earth had once failed by the trick of a stepmother who wished the children dead. She had told lies, burned the grain, and corrupted the message from the oracle, saying the only way to save the land was through the children's death. The people, filled with fear and hunger, turned on Phrixus and Helle. The king, though torn by love, allowed it, forced by voices louder than his own. So the two stood before the altar, with fillers tied around their foreheads, crying together, prepared to die side by side. Their mother, the cloud who had once lived among them, saw all from the sky. She struck her breast in agony, wrapped herself in storm, and descended in a rush of mist and grief. She took them away from the knife, away from the fire, and placed them on the back of the ram. It was not a beast born of the earth, but a gift of the gods, its fleece pure gold, its hooves never touching ground. But even as it rose, the pain did not end. The girl held to the ram with trembling fingers, and as she slipped, her brother reached for her, his hands just too far. He saw her fall, unable to stop it, and his heart was torn. Some said she joined the god of the sea, taken in by the one who rules beneath the waves, given a new form in the deep. Others said she was lost forever, her body gone, but her name made immortal. Later poets spoke of the sea with bitterness, of the waves that beat the shore, of the clouds that hid the sun, and of the place where soft voices met hard fate. One man, crossing those same waters in love's pursuit, prayed to the maiden whose sea he now faced, calling it the Maiden Sea. Others cursed its name, saying that even if the sea spared their lives, it mocked them with memory. Some said it was the weeping of her mother, falling in rain that darkened the skies and stirred the waves, while others believed it was the anger of the stepmother, turned into a sea goddess herself, who still disturbed the waters. Those who passed over the sea spoke of how it had claimed a girl too young, and how her story made the waters forever mournful. And though both children had ridden that path, it was her name the sea kept. It was not called the Sea of the Ram, nor the Sea of the Boy, but only Hela's name lived in the waters, whispered by the wind and carried in the salt spray of every wave that touched the shore. The sea, named for her, kept her forever in motion, never still, never silent. Ships sailed over her name, stars shone above it, and the story, carried on every tide, never faded, from the fall that named the Hellespont to the fleece that still hung in a distant land, gleaming with the light of the past. Hela tossed on the purple waves, her body light upon the wind, her hand still reaching for the golden fleece as the ram soared onward, shining with divine light. It was meant to be a journey of rescue, a flight from death to freedom, as the ram, sent by their mother, carried both children, brother and sister, across the wide sea on its gleaming back. They had been placed upon it together, fleeing danger in their homeland, their brows still wrapped in ribbons from the altar where they had nearly been sacrificed. But midway across the sea, far from any shore, tragedy found them. Hela's grip loosened. Her left hand, once firm on the creature's horn, trembled, her body worn by fear and weightless sky. The moment was brief. Her fingers slipped and she fell. Phrixus reached for her with all his strength, arms outstretched, heart splitting as she dropped. He called to her, tears already filling his eyes, but there was nothing he could do. Half his soul, his sister in peril and journey, was lost to the waves. He clung to the ram, and the ram flew on, but the grief followed him forever. In that moment of her fall, the sea received her. It had been nameless before, but from that day it carried her memory. It bore the name Hellespont, the Sea of Hell, and all who crossed its restless surface spoke her name. Her brother mourned her, even as he completed the journey alone, riding the ram to Colchis and giving thanks for his life by hanging the golden fleece in a sacred temple. But his thoughts never left the moment she vanished. Some said she died in that fall, claimed by the depths, but others told another tale, that she was not lost but changed, that as her body sank she did not perish, but was met by the god of the sea, who caught her before harm could come, that she was brought down gently, and in that sacred meeting her form became divine. The girl who had fallen became the goddess of the very waters that had claimed her. The sea that bore her name became her realm, and one day, as dawn was rising and the ship of the Argonauts sliced the waves in search of the fleece her brother had once given, the sea opened before them. The crew, startled, watched as a figure rose from the depths. There stood Helle, not lost, not broken, but radiant, her head crowned like the sea-born sisters beside her, her hand holding a golden scepter. She came in calm, not storm, and her voice was gentle as she spoke. She looked upon the captain of the ship, a man cast from his home by fortune and forced to sail dangerous seas. She saw in him a reflection of her own fate, once banished, once carried over these same waters. She told him not to lose heart, for though the sea was wide and the journey hard, his path still waited, and the land he sought still lay ahead. She gave him words to carry, a message for the dust of her brother buried far away, that she had not vanished into death, not wandered the paths of the underworld, but lived still, not in shadow, but in the sea's embrace. The rocks had not crushed her, the waves had not broken her. As she fell, she was caught, and the ones who ruled the waters gave her new form. She joined the daughters of the sea, her spirit now quiet and strong, her voice now one with the waves. And though her brother believed her gone, she watched over him from below. From then on, those who crossed the sea remembered not just the name but the presence, the wind upon the water, the calm before storm, the quiet voice that whispered across the tide. It was hers. And some said the storms over that sea came not from chance, but from sorrow or fury, that when clouds gathered and waves roared, it was her mother weeping, the cloud who had once saved her children, mourning the daughter she could no longer reach. Others said it was the anger of the stepmother, now turned into a sea goddess herself, disturbed by the memory of the name that still floated above her realm. Either way, the sea was restless. It was not a place for soft voices or light hearts. The Hellespont became known for grief, and even those who survived its passage did not forget its story. Poets spoke of the maiden who had fallen, and the brother who mourned her. They asked why the sea bore only her name, when both had crossed it, when both had faced peril. But the sea had made its choice, and her name endured. Her fall had marked the waters forever. Even those who came later, swimming across the same strait for love, paused to whisper her name, to offer prayer, to ask for mercy. The waves, still foaming white, still crashing hard against the rocks, carried her name through time. The water remembered, and the world did too. Helle, daughter of the sky's mist and the earth's pain, became the voice beneath the sea, the goddess of the Hellespont, both lost and never lost, both mortal and divine. And her story moved not only through wind and wave, but through the hearts of all who dared to cross her waters. the deep himself awarded me, willing justly, and our gulf envies not Eno's sea. She ceased, and with a sigh she hid her sad face beneath the calm waters, as the memory of her father's sorrow returned to her like a distant shadow. Her voice, once clear and sorrowful, was gone, and all that remained was the ripple she left behind as she sank back into the stillness of the sea. The prince, standing at the edge of his ship, held a bowl filled with wine and poured it into the water as an offering. He looked to the sea and began his prayer, calling to the one who once had fallen from the sky-riding ram, the daughter of his own bloodline, now reborn as a goddess of the deep. He spoke to her as kin, calling her not just a spirit of the sea, but a pride of their house, asking her to open the way ahead and bless the voyage that would carry them between unfamiliar shores. As his words faded into the waves, the ship moved forward once more, flying over the waters that once took her, between cities that had known her name, through a strait still carrying her memory. And far across the sea in the land of Colchis, there stood a tomb, the resting place of the one who had survived, who had arrived alone. Beside that tomb was a figure carved in stone, his sister carved in marble, a quiet reminder of the one who did not complete the journey. She stood there, not with joy, but with fear, her face turned between two dreads. On one side the wrath of the one who plotted her death, on the other the sea that had stolen her from life. Her hands, even in sculpture, hesitated to touch the ram that had once promised escape. And now, as the Argonaut came to this sacred place, he brought with him wine and reverence, and at the altar he called to the one buried there. He asked for favor, for guidance, for remembrance of the land from which that soul had come. He asked too for the one whom the tomb did not hold, the sister whose body had never been recovered, who had vanished not into death but into the sea itself. Though she had not been buried, he honored her still, calling her goddess now, no longer lost but changed. He called to her to aid their cause, to look kindly on her kin, and beneath the surface of the waves, her presence stirred. She was no longer only the girl who had slipped from the back of a golden ram, no longer just a name given to a strait. She had become one of the sea's own daughters, a nereid among the countless goddesses of the water, holding sway over the very sea that once swallowed her. Her realm was not peaceful. It was a place of memory and sorrow, and some called those waves detested, for they had taken too many, their reputation darkened by what had been lost. Yet she, beneath the surface, was no longer only sorrow. She remembered her fall, her brother's cry, the look of the sky as it turned above her, but she also knew the sea's quiet, its depth, its mystery. The Hellespont bore her name and moved with her breath. Ships crossed her domain, winds stirred her hair, and those who remembered her spoke her name, not just with grief, but with prayer. Statues showed her still afraid, but the sea knew her differently. The waters had made her something new, something watching, something present, and those who poured wine into her waves did not do so in vain. She was still listening, and she still guided those who sailed where she had once fallen.